Morning. All right, wonderful. Good morning and welcome to the November 30th, 2022 meeting of the McMinnville Water and Light Commission. Trina, will you please do a roll call
Yes, Mayor Dropkin,
here?
Commissioner Tankersley.
Here.
Commissioner Gormley hasn't joined us quite yet, but he should be joining shortly. Commissioner Christensen
Here.
and Commissioner Tate.
Here. Thank you very much. To get us going, I'd like to turn this over to BDS Planning. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mayor. Good morning. My name is Andres Mantilla. We are with BDS Planning. We'll go through introductions here in a second, just to refresh your memory of who we are. And we will, Trina, if you can share the slideshow now, you can go start doing that. Go to the next slide. So today we are here to take the next step in the strategic planning process. In front of you, you have a very draft document of an assessment that we did that's made up of several interactions, one-on-ones with you and with the staff, with the staff leadership that we'll go over. We have the initial results of a staff survey that we completed and some of our observations, getting to a conversation around the strategic priorities that are going to make up the kind of base or framework of the strategic plan. And we hope today to have a conversation with you to affirm those strategic priorities and have a conversation around what some of the key issues are within those strategic priorities and then some intended outcomes. And so hopefully by the end of this meeting, you feel that we have a good kind of solid foundation of how this plan is going to move forward. Again, my name is Andres Mantilla. I am the project director for this project working with BDS Planning. I'm a partner there. Turn over to Jacqueline and Brian to introduce himself.
Hi, everyone. Good to see you again. Good to meet you in person. Mayor, my name is Jacqueline Robinette, and I'm the project manager for this project and support organizational development and strategic planning within the firm.
And I'm Brian Scott, a managing partner at BDS and founder of the firm, and longtime history of doing various projects in McMinnville over the years, including the city's strategic plan 2 or 3 years ago.
Great. Next slide, Trina. Next slide. So just to ground us in where we are in the process, we had a kickoff meeting with you all with the staff leadership about a month ago or so. And in between then, we were doing these kind of these interactions and interviews with staff. What's going on with the screen here? Next slide. So today we're going to a conversation around affirming these priorities that will help us then get further in this process when we go through the goals and objectives and establish some work groups. Next slide.
You need just a second.
Yep. So we always like to start the conversation around strategic planning, just setting the context of how we're defining strategic plan, just to get everybody in the right mindset. We define strategic planning as a deliberate and disciplined effort to guide why an organization exists, what it does, and how does it do it. It's also a process by which an organization envisions its future and develops goals, objectives, and actions to achieve that future. So it's really important in this case, in a particularly very relevant moment for you all as you're looking over the next 5 years and how does the utility grow and prioritize its actions. Next slide. What a strategic plan is not a method to predict the future. It is not a substitute for the leadership of your staff leadership of your decision-making authority. It's not typically a smooth linear process. Usually things are coming in that are external factors that are impacting your organization as we're working through this. And it's not, and this is a particularly key thing that we will reference a lot through this process. It's not a list of everything that you're doing. So in this way, a strategic plan is not a work plan. It is what we like to think, a document that shows where do you want to put disproportionate effort and interest over the next 5 years in this case to achieve a certain goal of a certain. As we go through this, just keep that in mind because I think often we get into a situation where it becomes a list of everything you do, and then that doesn't allow you to prioritize your actions.
But for clarification, it does inform action plans
It does inform action.
Okay.
You're able to use that prioritized list
as a guiding document.
as a guiding document.
Okay.
Exactly.
Yes, thank you.
Next slide. So we like to go through also components of the strategic plan. Every strategic plan starts with kind of foundational statements or principles. So you have a vision and a mission. You have core values or guiding principles. You have an intended impact statement and a theory of change. We're in this process not going to spend a lot of time here because the organization, has a pretty solid vision, a pretty solid mission. We might come back and think about what are the core values of the organizations after we determine what the strategic priorities are and the goals and objectives, just to make sure that the core values and guiding principles are reflective of the things that you want to do. But really, then the components of a strategic plan, next slide, Trina, are made up of the strategic priorities. And under each of the strategic priorities, next slide, are a goal statement that talks about it as a future state of how you want to achieve or improve that strategic priority. Under each goal, you have, next slide, a series of objectives. And then each objective is you have actions and measures that tell you what you're going to do and how you're going to know that you're being successful and with specific numbers, etc. Welcome, Commissioner Gorman. And then you have these kind of two other things these two other things that we like to call major moves and key metrics. So the key metrics are you as a commission, you might end up in a strategic plan having 40 to 50 actions, and those aren't necessarily all going to carry the same relevance to you as a commission, but you might have a handful of maybe 8 to 10 key metrics that you're going to be thinking, how are we going to tell, is the organization kind of moving in the direction that we want it to, and is the strategic plan being followed? And so those are going to be your key metrics. And then your major moves is what are the 3 to 5 major things that you're accomplishing over the next 5 years that is going to be really easy to explain what the strategic plan is about. Yes, you're doing all these things, but what are the 3 to 5 things that you're like really focused on that you can kind of explain, anytime somebody comes and tells you, hey, what are you doing with your strategic plan? We're doing these 3 to 5 things. And those are kind of what we consider your major moves. So altogether, this is what the components of a strategic plan look like as we define it today. Next slide, Trina. We're going to be focused on strategic priorities. And so just to give you a sense of how this is mapping out. That makes sense? Okay. So in front of you, you have the next draft memo, which makes up this assessment summary that we're going to go to in a second. 2 key things real quick. There's going to be more detail in this memo in front of you than there is on this PowerPoint. So just if you want more information, you can reference it in your packet there. And we've updated the slide show to reflect some of the discussion with the staff. But that discussion hasn't been reflected in the memo yet. So there just might be some slightly different ones, and I'll make sure to point those out as we go through it so that you can track that. Does that make sense? Okay. Next slide. So what made up the assessment? I started to talk about this. We met last month. We had a meeting with the senior staff or staff leadership, as we reference it in the document. We had a kickoff meeting with the commission, with you all. We administered a staff survey, which we got 53 responses, and we'll talk about some of those results. And then we had, in between that last meeting and this meeting, one-on-one meetings with yourself and with some of the staff leadership as well.
And that's like 3/4 of the staff responded.
That's like 3/4 of the staff responded. Yeah. So I think that's a pretty good response rate. Next slide. This is just to show you the conversations that we had, and it's reflected here in the slideshow. But next slide. The staff survey asked 3 questions, and one was around what is your biggest what is the most important area, which is around what is the biggest fear or concern that you have, and then there was a a more open-ended one. That what else are you thinking about? And on this one, what are the most important areas the utility should address over the next 5 years to ensure it continues its successful service to the community? And respondents can select up to 3. And so the top results here, number 1, recruitment and retention of utility staff, 81%. Internal communication with staff. Emergency preparedness. Improve the working relationship between staff and the city of McMinnville, at 25%. And improve communication relationships with external stakeholders. And this information in more details at the back of that packet there.
And again, this is staff.
This is staff.
So this is not management level.
This is every staff member, every employee.
Was asked. Pick your top 3
Up to 3.
issues.
Yep. And so number 1, recruitment, 81% respondents said recruitment. And then internal communication and staff. And some of these are key themes that you're gonna see picked up in some of the
If
other.
you have a question, speak up.
Well, I'm stunned by the recruitment retention. Generally throughout the organization, that would be such a high priority.
Mhm.
That's startling to me. I would think they would be thinking about other things, sort of their day-to-day operations, so that really puts a finer point on the challenge there.
And we'll go into this in a little bit more detail, but the utility's at a place where a lot of folks are either going to be retiring or looking to or different units are struggling to get employees or new applicants in at certain levels of skill set and education. And so that's on their mind a lot. And it's reflected a lot in the one-on-one conversations that we had as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate that.
Is this how the question was asked? Was this like, did they have,
They had pre selected categories.
and was there any other detail included underneath those descriptions, kind of the way it is laid out here, where it, talks about recruitment retention, but then it gives a little expansion?
No,
No,
it was fairly open-ended in that way. And understanding that there could be some loaded words here and kind of how folks are thinking about, for example, the term working relationship with the city or communication. So, but this is just to get a snapshot to inform this discussion, and then as we go forward in the process, there'll be other opportunities for staff to weigh in as we get more granular.
And Tom, maybe you know this, and I perceived, but don't really know that the retention rates are really good within this organization.
I think they are. We can check with John, but I think they are. We have some turnover, but I don't think that hasn't been a problem historically. It's mostly retirements and maybe with the new in the utility business. I know there's a lot of, especially like linemen and some of the engineering jobs, there's a lot of pressure that utilities are trying to find people from other utilities.
Mhm.
So that could be part of it.
Yeah. The conversation yesterday reflected a lot of internal promotion from within. So a lot of retention in that way, not just, in the same job, but, growing through the organization. But yes, the issue around recruitment. is important, yeah.
And I would suspect retention also means succession planning. So that's even sort of a nuance to that whole piece as well.
And, I think my organization was a good sort of mirror of this organization, up until the time I left. And what I mean by that is really a lot of long-term employees that really had invested, 10 to 20 years in the company. And when you look at this question about the next 5 years, how do you continue to be successful in the community? I think that my employees had a sense of they had really good ownership of their jobs and felt very proficient and thought internal operations was not their main concern either. Like they were proud of their work that they were doing. But I think that they did realize that, there was future planning that needed to happen to continue on the work that they were
doing. And so there was a lot of awareness about what that looks like. So I think again, it's like depends on how you read into, what you're getting asked.
And this idea around succession planning is something that's going to come up here in a second, a little bit with a little bit more detail.
But I also could be, it could be a sign that staff is feeling like there are some problems with management. I don't know that. But I mean, it could be that too. I mean, you look at the first two. And retention and internal communication, those could be red flags. I don't know if you'd have an insight to that.
Well, I wouldn't, first of all, they got to pick off of a short menu and they got to pick 3. So, things are going to get a lot of responses. And so I would say compare the things to each other and take it with a grain of salt, take it seriously, but don't freak out at 81% because.
So I'm not freaked out about it, but my concern is that there needs to be intentional, focused effort placed on that to give confidence to the enterprise that we've got this.
Yeah.
And to me, 1 and 2 fit together, right? Like we know we've got this problem. How are we dealing with it? And that hasn't been connected yet, right? So that to me is an opportunity.
Very appropriate comment for a strategic plan, right? Disproportionate interest
not
in
my
effort.
first
There you
right,
go. There you go. We want to go to the next.
Could I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead, Ed.
How many people participated in this, or what is the percentage of staff that actually provided information?
Yeah, in the high 70%, so about 53% staff. Or
Thank you.
53 staff, and there's 83.
83.
3/4 of the staff. Trina's going to mess with the screen share to try and deal with this flashing we've got going. So just pause a second.
Okay.
If this doesn't help and it keeps doing that and it's bothersome, we can try restarting the system. It'll just take a couple of minutes, so we'll have to pause, but we'll try resharing again and see if that helps.
Great.
Trina, I can also share it if that might help as well as an alternate. But go ahead and try and reshare, Trina.
Okay.
Okay. So far, so good. No, spoke too soon. Yeah. So I'm just gonna go on and see if it does itself well. The other question we asked is, what is your greatest fear or concern? And again, take these responses with a grain of salt. Similar percentage of responses, 51 responses here in this case versus 53. Number 28% being unprepared for emergencies. Oh, that's not working. Yeah, Trina, it keeps on flashing in and out.
It is not flashing.
Is it both screens or just that one screen?
Just the big one. Are folks able to?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to shift over here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Commissioner Gorman, are you able to see it? Or flashing on your screen as well?
No, it's perfect. It's a pull up on my screen.
Well,
Okay.
this is nice too. Then Commissioner Gormley can see our faces.
Oh, there you go.
Backs
Okay.
of our heads.
Okay, great.
Game.
All right, perfect. So we'll just continue and then Trina, we'll just,
Before you get started again, I've got a question. I think twice, if not 3 times, you use the expression "take it with a grain of salt."
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to be nitpicky, but in my mind, that expression means it's negligible. Don't worry about it. So if it's that being the case, then what are we wasting our time then if it's all grain of salt stuff?
no, I think the comment was meant that we populated these categories based on some of the feedback that we heard from the kickoff and the staff meeting, and then some of the one-on-ones. And so I think there's going to be other opportunities for folks to weigh in on the specifics, to be a little bit more kind of granular in terms of what their concern is. But this should help map some of the should be another tool in the tool chest to map some of the feedback that we're hearing. And so you want to?
Yeah, I think in that previous question, they had 6 choices and they were told to pick 3, right?
Yeah.
So an 80% response on one of those just means it was in most people's top 3 somewhere.
So they didn't rank their choice.
It's not a ranked choice.
No,
number.
it was just
Okay.
pick three, so it was a pretty low bar to get into somebody's top three.
Mhm.
You know, and so pretty much everybody thought, you know, almost everybody thought that one was one of their top three. So it's just kind of the way it sticks up there and it says really high percentage makes it seem like,
It's alarming.
yeah, there's
And it's
a
not.
train coming down the tracks really fast. I don't think it means that. I think it means everybody has that on their mind and we should, as you said, pay attention to it and address it as a strategic issue, but
Mhm.
just that overwhelming percentage doesn't mean that like it's the number one thing by 80% of the staff.
Okay. So great.
It looks like it.
Let me ask you a question then.
Yeah, go ahead.
These are all pre-populated as if pick the best answer that fits what you think might play with this question. In your experience as planners, when you set somebody down and look them right square in the eye and said, just tell me what's on your mind, you know, no preconceived things to select, do their answers fall in line or do you end up getting a whole different picture? Because in my mind, I think you might end up with a different picture with this organization.
Yeah, there's going to be the next slide is going to start to get at some of that, Commissioner, but also I think you will be surprised as we go through the feedback, and granted with the staff leadership, that there's a lot of common thinking in terms of what are some of the strategic issues or most important things.
I'll also add in both the first and second question, there was an other open-ended category where folks could type in what they thought the greatest issues and fears were, and none aggregated into an emerging theme that made the list. And that's what, when you look at this pie chart, that, you know, northeast corner of the pie chart, each of those represents a single response. And that's why there's not a corresponding label for each of those. So there were many people who chose the other option and wrote an additional comment. I went through all of those and analyzed them and either grouped them into that's someone who I think categorically wanted to say a more specific thing about preparedness. So I put it in the preparedness bucket, or it was someone's one-off thing, which does not mean it's not an important concern, but it didn't aggregate into a populated theme. And then as Andres goes into the third question was, what else do we need to know? And there were some redundancies within that where folks were able to elaborate on their feedback to the first two questions and also to Commissioner Gordon-Lee's point, bring up other thoughts.
Okay. Great.
So just to go through these, being unprepared for emergencies or the unknown, inability to meet the needs of the community at 22%, public perception of the organization, misalignment of stakeholder relationships between the utility and the city, and then rate increase. Again, this is a fear, concern of the utility as an organization. Next slide. And then we asked an open-ended kind of what additional comments do you have? And this is again, kind of compiling some of what Jacqueline just said. So the utility should be forward thinking and then a little bit, some nuance in there in terms of addressing changing consumer needs, transition to electric vehicles, technical advances, forward thinking in terms of how it's retaining employees, appreciation, wages and benefits. Other comments around relationship with the city, and this was we'll get into more specifics around this as well in the one-on-ones. But there was the idea that this misalignment with the city is not happening at the staff level. And instead, it should be addressed by leadership at the leadership level and at this table with between the commission and the council. And the staff will follow suit in terms of what the direction and vision is. And we can get into more detail on that one. A lot of comments around emergency preparedness as a priority. Improve communication, internal, reflective in terms of how the leadership is communicating with its staff, and internally between departments, externally to community. And then a couple comments around improving facilities with specificity in terms of the office space and the maintenance barn. That's what they call it. So This is just a data point, and just keep this in mind as we go forward into some of the other things that we heard.
This was an open-ended
This was
question.
an open-ended question. Yeah. Trina, next slide. So then we did these one-on-one conversations with staff leadership and with you all. And the next couple slides are kind of what we heard and kind of group our ability to kind of group these into just kind of themes or buckets, if you will. And the first one really came in kind of an organizational focus. There's a sense from staff and from the commission that this is a stable organization with substantial and reliable and ongoing funding, a successful track record. It's got a respected commission and experienced staff. That the mission still feels relevant. The folks are excited about what they're trying to do here and the purpose for the organization. But that recruitment, retention, and retirement of employees are of concern to specifically the organization leadership, specifically to the staff leadership, as they're looking over the next 5 years in terms of how they're going to meet the needs of what they need to do. You know, what is the recruitment strategy look like, or how does it shift to meet the needs of the organization? What does succession planning look like? There's a desire to improve internal and external communication generally, and then we'll go into more specifics here in a second. And an aim to increase advocacy. This one is there's a feeling specifically within the staff, but I think we've heard some of the conversations that I have with you is that a lot of things are happening to the utilities in terms of it has to function within a regulatory environment. And so I think there's a desire to increase the internal capacity of the organization to kind of do advocacy and build kind of shared advocacy agendas with its partners. So next slide.
Does that look like a sort of a legislative?
Like a legislative, yeah. Similar, so very much similar to what you were just talking about before the meeting,
Yeah.
Then there was this bucket around stakeholder relationships, and there's concern in every single conversation I had in one way or the other, concern regarding the status of the relationship between the utility and the city of McMinnville. Kind of what is the framework? What does it mean? How does it move forward? And really an understanding that until that is solved, it's going to impact the ability of this organization to do its work in some way. As I mentioned, this topic came up in every conversation. So everybody agrees that it's a concern. There's a drastic difference of opinion in terms of what to do about it, depending on who you ask. So we're going to talk
Like
about
from what to what? What
from we have to resolve this issue before anything else can move forward, to this is an important issue, but and it needs to be solved, but we can't let it take over this process because we have all this other stuff to do. There's also a desire, what we heard, to have a greater involvement in regional economic development in terms of forming stronger relationships with kind of chambers, with business organizations, to kind of understand what the market's doing, understand what consumer and customer needs are. And there's a kind of pride in terms of how the organization's doing its customer service and pushing itself to meet evolving customer needs.
So when you say regional economic development, it's more of see how we fit in the scheme of things and how we can align different types of partnerships regionally.
It's build partnerships regionally. It's being proactive in the relationship building to understand what the kind of needs are, the kind of utility needs.
So structure the relationships a lot like the other larger utilities do, where they have economic development initiatives with them. And
That's right.
Okay, got it.
Next slide. We also heard that in terms of capital projects, and I'm using capital projects here as a bucket very generally. I know the word capital means different things to different people, but the utility really prides itself in this kind of long-term thinking. It's almost like a guiding principle or core value. Its ability to kind of be very, very proactive and not reactive in the way that it does its business. And so in that way, it's pride. It has a lot of pride in its long-term thinking and the ability to prioritize needed capital investments. And there is a feeling that we're at a critical decision point around making these continuing that prioritization and decision-making about very specific things for example, securing the Willamette River water supply, building system redundancies. This kind of is also reflected in the emergency preparedness category, improvements to the water treatment plant, and then service expansion or services to zone 2 or tier 2 as an example. There is also recognition, we heard this mainly from staff, of kind of some external challenges that are happening and are affecting the supply chain. It makes the acquisition of materials to just maintain and serve the current system, or be prepared for future things that need to happen to the system. And there's challenges in construction costs and labor costs. But this kind of system maintenance is also an important thing as it relates to servicing the system. Next slide. Finally, we heard a focus on emergency preparedness. There's a strong desire amongst the staff and a lot of you to prioritize emergency preparedness initiatives. This is as a reaction to the last 3 years of what's happened with pandemic planning. There's a sense that the utility does disaster kind of planning and disaster responsiveness a lot, given if a utility line goes down or something that they need to respond to right away, they're well positioned to do that. And there's a desire to have more clarity of roles when there's the unknown disaster, the bigger kind of pandemic type disaster, and really having a clarity of roles between what is the responsibility of the utility and what is the responsibility and role of other partners, for example, the city or other regional stakeholders like the county or other, state, et cetera.
In those conversations was Cascadia mentioned?
Yeah, Cascadia.
Yeah, so that sort of seems like that's the next one.
Yeah.
Right.
And just this next point is repetitive, but especially given the experience of the last year, is really focusing on needing to build redundancies into the system. So that's what we heard. Next slide, Trina.
In the discussion with the staff yesterday, we also noticed that the water and light deals with emergencies every day. It's sort of part of what it does. And I think when people are talking about emergency preparedness, it's like the really big emergency, or something like that. It's kind of what people are working on.
Well, and it's not singular to this enterprise, right? So it's being prepared in a much broader perspective and sense of, so you got to know who your partners are, and you've got to have good lines of communication with your partners.
Yes. So that's what we heard. And here are some of our observations in terms of, I think, things that we think are critical in addition to the things that we've heard in the previous slide. We think diversity of staff is also an issue that should be addressed. And that word diversity means, defining what diversity means, tracking the diversity of your staff, maybe investing in some external programming or training, et cetera, to meet, address some of the gaps in diversity. We think that specifically there needs to be succession planning and improved internal communications between the staff leadership and the staff, and then succession planning as relates to not only the staff but the board. I think this is the response. There was a lot of reaction from the staff and from the commission around the fact that some board members or some commissioners might be transitioning off, and what does that actually mean? How are we retaining some of that knowledge, institutional thinking and knowledge? From stakeholder relationships, it's our opinion that the critical thing that needs to be solved is this clarity of role between the utility and the city. As I mentioned, this issue came up in every single conversation. And for us, there's issue in front of you around, or in front of us around the surcharge as the latest thing, but it feels like there's a foundational opportunity to really clarify roles in a partnership framework, or because if not, there is an ability for that to affect all the other things that you're trying to do over the next 5 years. We think improved external communications to the community, specifically the ratepayers and other partners, should continue and be expanded and be more consistent. I think this was reflected in the staff conversation we had as well. And so putting some disproportional emphasis in terms over the next 5 years as to how you're building that function, how to think makes sense to us. Next slide. our sense of the capital projects is that there is a strong sense of what the system needs are and have been identified. There's been a lot of work done to think through what's next. Obviously some of those numbers need to be updated based on the inflation and based on kind of the COVID realities. But the what is fairly well defined. Our sense is that this strategic plan shouldn't reinvent the wheel then as it relates to capital projects, but it should be a vehicle to continue to prioritize and update those capital projects, thinking about important acquisition strategies and system redundancies, and really set up the organization to take on the next master plan updates, both in terms of the electric and the water system master plans. But we do think there's disproportionate attention that's needed and likely investment that will be needed to maintain the current system, given some of the ongoing supply chain, increased construction and labor costs. I think John mentioned that some of the costs have more than quadrupled over the last couple of years, and some of the estimates really need to be, some of the forecasting and some of the estimates need to be updated accordingly. And next slide. And then as it relates to emergency preparedness, it's very clearly a priority. It's something that the organization is doing, as Brian mentioned, at a small, maybe small is the wrong word, but at a regular interval, given some of the outages and things like that. But clarity on roles and responsibilities is needed, beginning with what the role, agreement amongst the staff and agreement amongst you all, what the role of the utility should be, and then going to those regional partners and saying, look, how do we work together in partnership to address some of these bigger disaster mitigation and preparedness. This one is probably easier to read in your packet. But we part of this kind of did strength, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. A lot of this is kind of just categorized based on the feedback we already shared. But we think the strength, experienced staff and board, respected commissioners, long experience and institutional knowledge, long track record of services, low rates, and general ratepayer satisfaction, and this kind of ability to have this longer term planning focus is a strength. We think a weakness, though, is that you don't quite have a system or strategy, comprehensive strategy around recruitment, retention, and retirement that's kind of coordinated. I think different units are maybe doing that at different success rates. There's some more work that needs to be done around diversity of staff and board. There needs to be a board staff succession plan. I think a big issue, main issue, critical issue is clarity of role and responsibility between the city and the utility, which also means we think more regular interaction between the commission and the city council. External opportunities, this kind of idea of building a shared advocacy agenda. So it's not just what the utility wants to do in its legislative agenda, but kind of how does it build with some like-minded utilities, and it seems to us that you're already doing some of that, but it could be expanded a little bit more. Improved city partnership, continued opportunities for economic development. There's an opportunity to continue to expand the system, build in redundancies, additional investments in assets to maintain those assets. We think there's a particular opportunity to expand training. This kind of maps back to the diversity of staff issue, and if there's maybe an inability or sometimes a struggle to retain or to recruit certain kinds of employees that are a more diverse set of employees, maybe there's an opportunity to build programming to address that with local institutions, educational systems, the unions, apprenticeship programs with the trades and colleges. And we think that there's a couple of threats, some of which are things that you can address and some of the things that are happening to you. There's loss of institutional knowledge with poor transition potential. So building a system to prevent that. There's general things that are impacting the city and the region, like affordability, cost of living. That's not something that you really control, but it's something that's potentially a threat to you as it affects maybe your recruitment of new employees. There could be this, if not addressed, continued strained stakeholder relationships. And in the same way, if not addressed, kind of this coordination of pandemic responses and emergency preparedness. Yeah.
So this may be a small point, but I think that we do have an impact on the affordability of McMinnville.
Okay.
The fact that we don't have system development charges for our utility means that housing is less expensive here. And I think that what it costs to live in McMinnville is not just your house payment or your rent, it also includes your utility bill.
Yeah, that's true.
And so I think that, you know, that is a weakness, but I don't think we should say it's nothing we can do something about.
Good point. Good point. Thank you.
Well, on the other side of that, I would say it is an issue for employee retention and recruitment because I think affordability here is the cost of living in McMinnville. And while utility rates are low, other things aren't.
No.
And so I think that's
No, I
the,
agree. I was just saying, I agree completely with that. I was just saying that I heard that, you know, we don't have any control of this as external, and I think we do.
I see.
Yeah,
That's the only point.
You have an impact on it.
Yeah, we
But
can't
the
control.
fact that
it.
you have really low utility rates doesn't result in an affordable
No.
window.
right.
But we can make it worse.
You can make it.
I'd recommend you do not.
But we should be aware that what we do could make it worse, so.
Yes, absolutely.
Take that into
Yeah.
account. Thank you for the clarification.
However, the rates have a strong impact on the ability to recruit and retain companies, right? So
Yeah.
it is a huge benefit.
Yes,
Yeah.
correct. So that was a lot of information right at you. What does this all mean? You can go to the next slide, you know, actually the next two slides. So we think that this all kind of is organized in 4 categories. And we are proposing these as the strategic priority categories that will make up the foundation or the structure of the strategic plan. So we think there's think of these as kind of buckets or categories and less about what the wording is. Although we did do some wordsmithing yesterday at the staff level, which was helpful, but we think there's very clearly an internal organizational focus, strategic priority, where we're thinking about kind of addressing internal facing actions that are critical to the success of the utility. For example, the stability of the staff, recruitment, retention, the culture of the organization, and internal communications. So we think that there are objectives that filter in under that strategic priority, and that's one. Next one, Trina. I think then there's an external facing one, which we're calling stakeholder relationships, of which, you know, improvements to external facing relationships, especially with the city of McMinnville, is important. Business, economic development, stakeholders, and community and ratepayers as well.
And by economic development stakeholders, who do you, how do you define that?
So we think of that as kind of like associations and kind of chambers and things of that nature. But
So
yeah,
I think some organizations are community development focused and some are economic development.
Okay.
And I sort of take a finer point on the economic development.
That's
It's
a
a
good
very strategic category. And I think sometimes it's everything, right?
Mhm.
Anybody that deals with business is economic development. The truth is, economic development organizations are built to recruit and retain a certain sector of the business economy, right? And it's usually industrial,
Mhm.
which to me is where Water and Light has a competitive advantage
Mhm.
in those conversations. To me, organizations like, and I hope this isn't offensive to anyone, chambers of commerce
Mhm.
are really about building networks, communication, making sure that your businesses know each other and that you can have business to business relationships. Economic development is it is the profession of recruiting and retaining. And I think industrial is where I would sort of, so I think those is very different. And you approach them differently and you
Okay.
engage with them differently. So that's just me sort of,
We're gonna make a note here. That's a good point. In
but
industrial stakeholders.
you know, chime in if,
Well, I agree with you, Jody, about the distinction between the chamber and say MEDP or something like that, or MIP. But I wonder if in McMinnville, economic development also isn't the whole tourism thing, the whole winery thing is, maybe that's industrial or
So
the restaurants and the
So it
lodging and
is,
such.
right? So one way to look at it is it's a coffee pot. You make a coffee pot or use a coffee pot to serve something. I'm concerned about the making of the coffee pot, right? Like how, if you're a winery, the front door sales is different than what occurs in the winery. So the manufacturing side of things, the beverage manufacturing, that's a very different conversation than how you market to tourists.
But-
They're the same
Yeah,
industry.
Right, but what I'm thinking is that in terms of our relationships with economic development stakeholders, it's like you said, it's easy for us to see with industrial kind of or production kind of customers because the rates and the help we can give them with more efficient machinery and stuff like that. But I don't think we think much about our relationship with the hospitality folks. And I don't know whether that's something we can or should do. I hadn't thought about it until you brought it up.
Well, to add to that too, you know, when you start talking about this industry specifically, you kind of expand into three parts of it because at its root, it's an agricultural industry, which definitely does affect the area. But then you have people engaged in the agricultural side of growing the crop. And, you know, in the, I forget our exact number, but I think we have somewhere, 12,000 ag workers essentially living in close proximity. And then you have the manufacturing and then you have the sales side. So it adds that third or that starting component of ag.
What I'm hearing is that the category is the external relationships or stakeholder relationships is the right category. There's some nuance in terms of how we're talking about economic development with industry, agriculture, hospitality, commercial.
And the
actions might be different.
Where Water and Light engages in those things.
Yeah.
So I look at it as a bill, right? Like where does Water and Light appear on the bill for that industry or that business, and sort of thinking about how we can better understand that relationship. And I agree with it, we are in a area that has high hospitality. We have a strong tourism component. We have an organization that's tasked with marketing the community. I'm looking at sort of the areas where Water and Light would, and I think all of them, right? Like Water and Light impacts everything, but where are we going to put strategic focus and be better at, right?
Yeah.
And if we get really clear on what it is to be a engaged partner I'll just go ahead, right? In an industrial environment, we're a better partner bottom line, right? Like we will be better with other businesses because we now have a better understanding of that.
Good point. And Commissioner Gormley, do you have go ahead.
Just to add a little bit to what Jody said, historically, the Chamber of Commerce has been about retailing, and the struggle in McMinnville as we started changing some of our retail bases is a lot of professional people became part of the chamber, but retailing as compared to manufacturing and that. But Water and Light historically has had different hats they wear with these folks. And I'll use the chamber as an example. Lots of Water and Light people have been on the board at the chamber. Some have been leaders, but all the events the chambers host, we might have a focus on something related to the retailing of our product, which is electricity, with having energy stuff. We've set up water displays downtown. Mm-hmm. Likewise, we have outreach we do to industry at all times, trying to do consulting. And I can think of the Darigold Creamery when we went and did a bunch of consulting that saved them tens of thousands of dollars. And think of Cascade Consulting we've done there, saving them millions of dollars and that. So Water and Light has really been, I think, extremely good at wearing these hats and being, they've been a great organization within the community.
Yeah. So it sounds like it needs to continue as part of an area within the street priority, as a street priority, and there's different emphasis and that we can focus on in terms of some of the actions and some of the objectives. Great. The other category we think is there's one around infrastructure.
One more thing,
Yeah,
if we can move on. What I'm thinking is that it ties in with the relationship with the community and kind of our brand. That we should keep in mind that we can do things, that some of the things we do also benefit these non-industrial customers. I'm thinking of the conservation stuff.
Yes.
With, you know, we can go into a retail establishment and change their lighting for them, or we can, and those kind of things, we just should keep in mind that we're doing that as part of our industrial development or our economic development for them, and then that'd be something we want to publicize.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes,
So
that's a great example.
the next category here in your packet, this is listed, it's labeled as capital projects and system maintenance. And this is where the staff did some changes here and changed it to infrastructure and resources. There's a bucket we feel around infrastructure and resources, which is the continued prioritization of major capital decisions, resource planning, you know, the results of some contracts that are happening and the resolution of those contracts, potential decisions around acquisition and expansion of the system. And there's also relations here, or there's also issues related to current ability to maintain the system, to support the life of the assets, et cetera. For example, supply chain, for example, acquisition of materials. Next slide. And then you think the fourth one is around emergency preparedness. And specifically as it relates to proactive planning and investments and clarity of role and responsibility in disaster management. We think that there's some conversations that need to happen internally to make sure that the utilities on the same page as with itself around what is the role that it needs to play within or wants to play within emergency and disaster management. And then there's a conversation with external partners around what are the roles and responsibilities of the region. So altogether,
I'm going to interrupt you here. We can't, I guess, gloss that up because there are some legislative standards and laws that dictate who's in charge.
Yeah.
And I've been on this board long enough to have participated in trying to put some things together, only get a phone call from the sheriff reminding me who's on first base, and it's not Water and Light or it wasn't the hospital. So
yeah,
I think we have to play into that. We have our day-to-day telephone poles get knocked down. We have water leaks and that, but we're, you know, the Cascadia things, and that's a whole different thing. But we have to overcome some of the bias you have with, this is very paramilitary. Guy with the stripes thinks he's in charge. Well, legally he probably is. So we just have to kind of schmooze that over and understand how we got to play the role in spite of that obstacle.
Yeah, that's a good point. And actually came up in the one-on-ones with, there is a kind of mandated or legislative or regulatory mandated structure around emergency preparedness. And in reality, it doesn't always work like that in terms of the onus of the response. And so that the ability to have internal clarity in terms of when are you a convener, when are you a leader, when are you a supporter, when are you an advocate, and have kind of good organizational clarity around that is a really important tool here. So here are the proposed strategic priorities. These were affirmed yesterday by the staff. And so next slide, Trina. You know, asking the broad question, are these the right strategic priorities? Again, understanding that this isn't a list of everything that you're doing. These are areas where there's going to be disproportionate emphasis, resources, capacity, information dedicated over the next 5 years. And we think, and you know, not everything can be a priority. And so, and this will eventually influence work plans and action plans, et cetera. But this is your strategic plan. Are these the right strategic priorities?
So I have one thought or question or thought. On stakeholder relations, I understand the perspective of saying it's an external partner. But I see the city's relationship with Water and Light a little bit differently. It's in that to the general public, we are two separate entities, right? There's that external relationship. But I think part of where the opportunity to reaffirm the relationship with the city is also, it's an internal discussion as well. So we're talking about leaders to leaders conversation. That to me feels internal as opposed to external, because there's going to be some opportunity to get messy in that space. And I don't think we can generally think of that as an external relationship.
Yeah.
I think that's a perfectly good point. You're not debating the fact that it's important to do.
No, absolutely not.
And so
I'm sort
is
of
it-
like, where does it?
Is it calling it stakeholder relationships doesn't sound right to you? Is that?
Or does it move into kind of the internal focus, organizational focus?
To me, that's where it belongs in both places.
Okay.
There's an external partnership that we need to express to the community. We are partners, but internally, it's a different type of partner, right? Like there's a different type of relationship, and I think that's where some of the recent things have been sort of elevated, or light has been shown, that there needs to just be more clarity on how we work together.
Okay,
So,
Trina, can you go to the next slide?
so Jody, I agree with that there needs to be clarity about how we work together. But I think it's important to understand for us and for the city that our employees work for the Water and Light Commission, and their employees work for the city council through the city manager, and everybody works for the city of McMinnville, the citizens of the city of McMinnville.
But I think it's like the difference between leadership and management, right? That there's an opportunity to clarify, reaffirm, reassess, and on roles and responsibilities. That to me is an internal discussion.
Okay.
Externally, the public believes we're two separate entities, and I think that's the right perspective, and that's to me that's good communication, right? There's no sort of
Right, okay.
who's on first, right? Like that to me is external, but
Okay.
the internal, the roles and responsibilities, how we engage, how we work together, how we communicate on perspectives coming from the city. How is that? What's the sort of process of engaging leadership at Water and Light through that process?
Sure.
And reverse. How does Water and Light engage with leadership at the city? It doesn't happen in a press release.
No.
Right? It happens sort of, hey, we need to get together. We're thinking this, we're not. That's a very different kind of.
And that reminds me of a question I had for Remy. Earlier in the program, there was a suggestion, I thought was a good one, that the commission and the council meet more often, but I realize, as much as we have on our plate, they have a lot more. They've got all the land use stuff, they've got the budget stuff, they have just all sorts of stuff. And I don't know if the council has the interest or the bandwidth to do that.
So we're planning regular engagement with the other organizations. So for instance, we just had planned, although due to some due to the incident at the high school, we canceled this meeting, but we just had a planned meeting with the school board. And we in my few terms on council, we had only done that one other time, which was just recently. And so we canceled that meeting because the purpose of that meeting was to talk about partnership, future land use planning, how we could work together and be strategic. And we didn't want to have the whole meeting be, and school district obviously was overwhelmed, but also, we wanted to make sure that when we're doing those joint meetings, that they're productive. The council also does regular joint meetings, which I understand these are different in that they're advisory committees that exist to the council, but joint meetings with the budget committee, joint meetings with the planning commission, at least annually. So I hesitate to answer a capacity question if it's more of a capacity question, but if it's not a capacity question and more of, how the council is engaging currently, then yes, that's
No, the question was the capacity, I mean, does the council have the time and the bandwidth to do what I understood they were suggesting? I think we do, but because we have.
yeah, I mean, it's
Yeah.
6 other people. I mean, I think, I feel like I have a very engaged and ready council. They're very responsive. I mean, just ask everybody to go to City Day at the Capitol. We have many people going up to Oregon Business Council leadership. So, I mean, we have a council that is highly motivated to address, correct, and work on a really successful future for McMinnville. And there's a lot of understanding that takes engagement. I have a
Yeah.
very engaged council.
Okay, so I just was concerned that we not expect something that wasn't possible.
Yeah, there's a lot of demand on the council, no doubt. But
Okay, great.
yeah, I think I don't know if that's the exact, I don't know if
that's-
that's the methodology. It is a first step,
Mhm.
but I think that type of
Yeah.
engagement is absolutely in line with kind of these next steps that we're taking in the city.
So I guess just to be blunt. We think the relationship with the city is a big deal.
Yeah.
And you need to address it, and you kind of. The words have passed through some of comments, is that a strategic planning issue? And my response to that is, heck, yes, it's really critical, and so. We might as well step into it, that would be my suggestion, and I'm basically looking for concurrence here. We can figure out what that looks like, but just making sure you all agree that it's a priority and we should go there.
I know, I agree. And my point was just that I didn't want to go down a path that really wasn't going to be sustainable because they didn't have, because it was an unrealistic expectation of us for the city, which if that were the case, that's going to make it hard to accomplish something anyway. If we just, if we say, well, we should do this, and they say, well, we can't, and then.
But I think the important part is that we agree it has to be done. And we don't know how we're gonna do that yet.
Okay.
And we need to be vulnerable. That's
Yeah.
the right word, right? We need to be vulnerable to say, we've got to fix this and we don't have the answer. And we may need to go to the city and say, what does this look like? As opposed to us saying, we want 1 meeting a month, we want right? We're reframing the relationship.
And I will say there's been conversation amongst administrative staff at the city and here at Water and Light about ways to start fostering this type of reaffirmation of relationship, and some very specific ideas that have come out of the lead administrators of both organizations. So I definitely see the willingness and desire.
So it's a key critical issue. There's elements of it that are internal, there's elements that are external, but I'm hearing that that the commission is feeling like it's a go and we should weigh in on that. Okay.
Yes.
These other 2 categories.
Comment, I still think the elephant in the room is the fact that we, the commission, have been advised by our attorney that charter reads differently to him than the folks downtown. And I think, as I mentioned to you when we talked, until we get that issue resolved, it'll be an issue.
That is a really good point. And I think in the way that building relationship is saying, these are the things that are critical path. And you use the word vulnerable, maybe flexible, but understanding kind of what are the key decision points that need to be solved for is the way that you get to then an eventual partnership agreement.
There's a technical relationship and there's a tactical relationship, right? The technical is the language in the charter, and the tactical is how are we going to work together in the future, right? And so I think not everything's going to get figured out.
Sure.
And that's part of being a good partner, right? Is saying, okay, step 1, 2, 3, 1 step back, 2 steps forward. It's not something that you figure out. And so that's how your every day will be, right?
Yeah.
So that's a relationship.
And I think it's also important that we have time in this discussion to talk about why the commission believes that that our interpretation of a charter is better for the citizens and that what we need, why we need to have this independence, why we need to have our revenues used for the perpetuation and the growth of the system and helping low income people rather than having our revenues just be used to finance the city. So I think we need to have that discussion because I don't think that's been discussed very much. Because there hasn't.
And I think we also need to recognize that, 3 or 4 years ago, we had a really great, all pulled on the rope together relationship with Water and Light. And this is an example of, as Jim Collins would say, changing people on the bus. You have turnover in councils and you have turnover administration. Water and Light did not go through that. And so you have somebody coming from a place that the council ran the utility previously, now coming and having, I think, some issues with the fact that we have a certain amount of independence. So what happened 3 years ago, we were getting along fine forward. And I think we have to look at that too. Their personalities play a big part in all of this.
What do you think changed, Commissioner Gormley, other than changes in leadership or specifics? Because
I think who's at the helm has a whole different attitude about the role that should take place with this board and the city. And it's based on the fact that where he worked previously, they ran the utility.
So there is a recognition and just reflecting on the one-on-ones that things have changed, but the atmosphere in which the city is operating and the utility is operating, given that the pandemic and everything else has changed, and so as well. And so there is an opportunity with new people to redefine a partnership that can be mutually successful and mutually respectful of each other and the strengths and that you bring to the table as the utility and the strengths that the city brings as well.
Well, and I think what you've identified, Mayor Gormley, is that what we have not done well as an organization is the ability to onboard commissioners, new members of our stakeholder groups in really understanding how this organization works and the roles and responsibility that we see for ourselves. I mean, we take pride in that, right? But do we explain it to people who are new to the community and those leaders that come to the community that we're going to be partnering with? We don't do that. And I think that's part of when you have a change of leadership and why we're concerned as a commission, succession planning. We don't know how to bring on new people, both as a commission and as a community. And so I would say as a commissioner, I feel like we have not addressed the ability to have a stronger onboarding process. And that is not the day-to-day operations. That's us as an enterprise with the city, right? So I think we need to move away from people and talk about process. And that's to me where the opportunity lies, because people will change, but the process should be the undercurrent of how we do things. We want new voices. We want people to say, but why? Why do you do it that way? Well, we do it this way because, or I don't know why we do it that way. That's where we become better. And if we have an incredible body of knowledge on this commission that will likely be significantly changed, and I'm getting it, I'm hearing it, right? It's going to change. So that means we will have that lack of history. So what are we going to do to make sure that's not going to happen? And it can't be, I'm going to speed dial somebody or I'm going to text somebody. We've got to be better at explaining it. And quite frankly, I'll just be honest, we may not get everything downloaded, but we should understand how we work with our partners, what our core mission is, what, those basic things. But I really think the focus is process, not people, right? Because that'll all change.
So let me ask a follow-up on that.
Commissioner Gormley.
Oh,
Yeah, go ahead.
sorry.
No, go ahead, Gord.
So Jody, I hate to belabor this, but I'm going to be very specific. Tom and I have a lot of history here. but it's been very redundant for decades. We've done the same thing over and over again. It's changed as methods change in that, but if Tom and I drop dead tomorrow, guess what? We're going to be gone, but this place is still going to run fine.
Yes.
We have made sure that we, the commission, stayed as policy people. And I think you've heard us talk about that. And John and his staff, this place will keep going. It really will. We have a lot to do to talk. I would say our role has been more about visioning and the future than it has been about the day-to-day stuff. It's important, but honest to God, this place will keep going when we're gone.
So
Yeah, go ahead.
back to what Jody said about us sort of passing knowledge on and such. I have a question about, and this is a tough kind of strategic and tactical question. Is it possible for us to convince the council and city staff that they should try to learn why things were going the way they did for so many years before they change it? And let me, to be specific, the city came up with a whole menu of things, including one councilor wanted to do all of them. The changing the pilot, increasing the pilot for everyone, including Cascade Steel, putting a franchise fee on water and electric, and also there was one other,
City
the
service
city
charge.
service charge. And they were talking about doing some or all of them, and there was, they didn't talk to the commission about it at all. I went to the meeting to present our objections, and the then mayor cheated and let me talk for, I think, 10 minutes, was it me, instead of my 5?
Probably. I
Yeah,
don't know.
maybe.
I hold those.
Maybe it was 15, but so they had 15 minutes of input from the commission, and they were the point of voting on it. Now, is this process where we talk to them, and this was a change in, I don't know, 100 years, maybe not. Ed, you were mayor that long. Was it 100 years? And maybe
25.
it was a change of generations and generations of the way things worked. And
Yeah.
I mean, so how do we fix that? I mean, I obviously have an opinion about, how it should come, what should come out, but the process was, I mean, there appeared to be no concern about the process of doing that. And I don't know, how do we fix that, Remy?
Well, I think I don't know the answer to how do you fix that exactly, other than it feels premature to be bringing up the administrator's idea, but at the same time, since we're talking about this so holistically, it might as, it felt like we we're trying to stay a little bit more broad, but this one of the specific ideas from our administrators is to engage a firm like yours to take us through a process. And I personally think that's a very wise approach, to have essentially a mediator to walk us through the parts of this. The other thing, and I've mentioned this to both administrators as well, is to find a way to kind of do a charter review. As Commissioner or Mayor Gormley said, the relationship is rooted in the charter, and one of the issues we have before us, and maybe it's not the root of the issue, but it's certainly fundamental to it, is that I think there are multiple interpretations of that, and I think so. Clarifying that technical relationship between the entities is a really strong step, and then the methodology of how we get there, whether it's a joint council commission meeting should clearly be part of it. Maybe that should be a regular, ongoing, whether it's annual or biannual or whatnot. But I think that that would be positive. I also, one of the other things, and I've told my council this, is that I intend to start giving, we do agents or reports at the beginning of council, and we talk about all our committee assignments. Well, in, almost getting close to 10 years on council, I've never heard a McMinnville Water and Light report in council chambers during those updates. We had a canceled meeting, and then we had an issue. We had to bring it back to get one agenda item through. So I didn't get my one out from the last one.
Over
but
10 years is not very good.
Yeah.
yeah. So, but I've told the council, I intend to start regularly reporting. I mean, this is, it's not a committee assignment, but this is one of the assignments of being mayor is to be a member here. And so I see a lot of responsibility with that mayoral relationship with the council. And, when the commission came before council, and I can only speak for myself, but when the commission came before council and was really clearly, upset, right, threatening litigation, that was a shock. That was a shock to me as a counselor at the time. That felt out of left field, just like I'm hearing you say that the actions of the council felt like they hit the commission out of left field as well. And so, I served under two different mayors, and I learned many important and good lessons from them. But I didn't really learn about water and light from them. And that's not to slight them in any way, because I think that's not my intention. I'm just recognizing that it didn't do the city a favor to not be doing, it's its own form of succession planning. Not that the mayor will always come from the council necessarily, but it's an appropriate place to be talking about and informing the council about water and light. I have learned in the last 6 months, what I have learned about McMinnville Water and Light is this much. And, in the 8 years preceding it, it was this much.
And there is the linchpin. That to me, it's not the moment of that realization, like, oh my gosh, that came out of left field. It's that you sat on a city council for 8 years and you weren't aware of this organization's engagement or partnership or whatever with the city. To me, that's it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
So
Right. It was
when
in
you
the
become
charter, but
president of the United States, right, there will be a new mayor. I'm just saying it's a position that will always be an opportunity. And if we don't support the mayor's position in giving good engagement,
It's about
this will always be the problem.
building better systems that are not just reliant on the people that hold those
Yes.
positions is what I'm
That's a great
hearing.
idea to have
And-
that report.
and-
always be-
And
Yeah.
building more regular interaction between the commission and the council as being one of those system plays. Commissioner Gormley, and then I want to move us along here. Yeah, go ahead.
This is to Remy and Mayor Remy. We spent a bunch of time together. It's been good time. You spent time with Tom. To give you some background, and I hate to belabor this, but when I was the president of the council, the mayor had some tremendous financial problems. And for about the last 8 months of his term, I almost ran all the meetings, and I knew the commissioners at Water and Light, and they invited me to come to their meetings. And I attended every meeting, including one or two that Mayor Porter might have showed up. So I had 8 months I spent understanding Water and Light. Plus I had relationships with all these commissioners that I'd known for a long time. So I hit the ground running. But honest to God, as I told you, my role over the years was to manage the council. But when you became mayor, nobody handed you a playbook, did they? Nobody handed you a director, anything. You rely on the staff and stuff like that. So I had great mentors with Joe Dancer and with Alan and what to do and how to move on. And the council really was informed all the time. And that was part of my spending so much time with each of those folks. And again, this goes back to, we had positive times, but the two mayors should have, I mean, I'm surprised Scott didn't talk more about what took place and stuff. I could see where Rick might, but Scott understood his job on the board so well, as we told you previously, but that is, you are the connection to that council and carrying the information back.
Yes, sir.
That's my belief, and that's how I did it for 24 years.
Absolutely. And I own that responsibility entirely. Please, again, I am not slighting the leadership or service of Mayor Hill in any way.
I understand.
What's that?
I know, I understand. I know.
And I have, you know, he once he knew he was going to retire, he, you know, encouraged me to start watching Water and Light Commission meetings. And I, you know, did to a degree, but that's, you know, it's different, right? Watching a recorded video, a part of it's just entirely different. And currently with my council president, I often encourage him to watch our commission meetings as well. And he does. And I believe he's also probably reached out to most, the current council president has probably reached out to most members of the commission, because as you can imagine, this is a high priority for me, not only when I'm sitting in this building, but when I'm sitting in that building as well. And so reparation or affirmation or reaffirmation of these relationships is really important. And in my own, you know, I hate to tell you how often I'm reading the charter late at night. It's really true.
Yeah.
But, you know, I have kind of thought about it in the terms of, well, we have something that's broken and here we have an instruction manual. So let me go back and review the instruction manual and perhaps glean more from that. And where that has really led me is, you know, I've thought a lot about, well, you know, why is the mayor an ex officio member of this commission? And really, it's not that complicated. It's exactly that. It's exactly to be the liaison to represent the community, and to kind of form those two parts, to liaise not only back to the council, but then out to the community. Is kind of where I've come to as why the mayor automatically is appointed on this board as well, or automatically sits and presides over this board, is to create those functions.
Mm-hmm. So really good discussion. I think the fact that we've spent the majority of the proposed strategic priority talking about this issue reaffirms the fact that this is the strategic issue. This is the biggest strategic issue to deal with, which is great. We have these two other strategic buckets, and then we went through with the staff kind of an exercise around so if these are the proposed strategic priorities, what are the key issues that we should be trying to solve, quote unquote, solve for under each of those strategic priorities? And I'd like to share that with you next. And I'm not hearing that there's anything beyond these buckets. These buckets seem reasonable as a starting point for us to move forward on the plan.
Yes.
Okay. Trina, can you go to the next slide? So this is the question that we asked. What are the key issues and topics of emphasis in each of these priority areas, if these are the priorities that are areas that are going to make up the plan? Next slide. And this is just to show that we had a pretty robust conversation with the staff around key issues and what success looks like. But more specifically, next slide. Under organizational focus, they talked about a key issue is to solve kind of the growth in staff and recruitment strategies. Key issue is the establishment around what do training programs look like. You know, a key issue is to sustain this kind of value around long-term visioning. They really felt that that was something that the utility was able to do in a really well because of the makeup of how the utility and the organizational makeup of that. We needed to solve for a clear understanding of roles and responsibilities, both in, you know, on a whole host of issues, but that one really speaks to some of the things that we were just talking about just now, right? Which is the roles and responsibilities between the utility and the city. This idea of maintained focus on things that the utility is supposed to focus on is something that they wanted to keep and to solve for increased diversity in staff and board and the development of other training opportunities. Next slide. As it relates to stakeholder relationships specifically, they thought this increased communication we talked about between commission and council was a key issue to solve. We've talked about that already. Building understanding of what the utility does, both with external partners specifically, and maybe especially with the city, but also internally with some of the staff and kind of what are the staff roles, and then solving for increased partnership with regional entities. This is kind of very generally defined. This kind of speaks to the conversation we were just having around building understanding, and then kind of understanding also what the city does and how it affects the utility. So kind of reciprocal relationship building in that way. Next slide. And then as it relates to infrastructure and resources, solving for how the utility can continue to have proactive maintenance, operations, and capital. Having a completed facilities plan. Those are the two things around the maintenance bar and expansion of staff. We talked about the number of staff hasn't changed in a long time, and is it relevant to increase the number of staff given the challenges and the priorities and projects that are coming up, and addressing funding for future projects. And in terms of emergency preparedness, really clearly kind of partnership of the utility with other regional partners. And then when is it that the utility is convening partners versus when it's leading on emergency preparedness. So those aren't all the key issues that are going to be in each of these. This is based on the conversation we had yesterday. So it's a pretty quick turnaround. But just to give you a sense of where the staff's head is in terms of these strategic priorities. So any thoughts on that and then if not, we can move on to the next section.
I would only add that as an extension of that, our prior conversation, as we look at that emergency preparedness, it says convening partners, but I would think the city would be one of those main partners that Water and Light wants to be convening with regarding emergency preparedness.
Yes.
Even going back to your the fuel station conversation of a few times ago, right?
And actually it would make sense if we were co-conveners, because then it really places us as the two should be working together. One should not be in front of the other, right? So it gives a great opportunity.
That was a really
For the purpose of where we are in the process, the issue was it wasn't clear. Like emergency preparedness is important and it's not clear who's supposed to make something happen. And so that's the issue that we need to think through during this.
And this is probably a much lower level of detail, but it's something somebody said earlier. It strikes me that we ought to have a manual that tells our staff, that they develop and tells our staff after we've done these things that, if this is the issue, we're not in charge. Here's who you should call and offer to help. Sort of that.
right.
There's already one of those. We just need to figure out.
Well,
There's already a plan.
Yeah, there's a
But
continuity of operations plan as well.
But I mean, this is for the Cascadia thing. That isn't necessarily us, but sort of.
Yeah, so it's gonna be a top-down, bottom-up understanding, right?
Right.
So it's top-down process, it'll be bottom-up understanding. So it's how do we fit into that? And if we don't even know that exists, right? Like who's in charge? It's very much a military operation when you look at.
But which colonel do we call?
For
what?
The guide will tell you.
Well, I mean, the other thing is
It's the
does the
sheriff
plan
we
exist?
call. The sheriff.
Does the plan exist? Is there understanding and alignment of the commission that the role is the right role? And then importantly, does the staff know what that means for them in these? It's great to have all these plans, and also does the staff know what to do with them should these things happen?
Yeah, because this will be, by the time it gets to the commission, the staff will have either helped or hurt the problem.
Right.
And
So any other, as we look at this, any other key issues that you see as important things that need to be addressed under these kind of strategic priority buckets? And this we'll continue to have this conversation with the staff in different work groups that we're going to dive a little bit more into detail, and I'll talk about that towards the end of the meeting.
Just want to make sure the stuff that's bugging y'all is on the list.
Is there any staff present today?
No. We had a meeting with the staff yesterday. Oh, Trina, sorry.
Thad.
and that,
Yeah,
Sorry.
I mean, yeah, Trina and Tad, okay, just curious.
Yeah,
We don't know if
Yeah.
anybody's watching from their offices
That's
because
true.
it's on YouTube.
that's true. Check the comments.
I don't think our staff spends a lot of time on YouTube during work hours.
John, send me a text if you're watching, okay?
That's my guess.
Okay. The next piece of this, I'm going to turn over to Brian, but hopefully
Is it time to go home yet?
almost.
You are home.
You,
No, he's not. He's in Arizona.
We really, as we build strategic plans, so we've had a conversation, through the assessment. We've used that assessment to determine key issues. Or sorry, we've used that assessment to determine strategic priority areas. We've had a conversation about what are the key issues within those priority areas. And so the next bit, part of this, Trina, go to the next slide, is what does success look like for each of those strategic priorities? So I'll turn it over to Brian to take us through.
Yeah. So I guess I want to take just a couple, but we are getting close to everybody's lunchtime. Just a few minutes to talk briefly about each of these 4 priority areas: organizational focus, stakeholder relationships, resources and infrastructure, emergency preparedness. And just take a moment on each one. What would success look like? What are the outcomes that we're looking for? 5 years from now, you show up at a commission meeting and the general manager comes in to give you a report on the strategic plan. How we doing? What would you like to have that report say at a very high level? And let's just take them one at a time. We've talked about organizational focus some today. What do you hope the general manager is telling you 5 years from now about what you've accomplished in organizational focus at a high level?
I'll give you one that the community, whether the business community or the citizens or the customers, have a clear understanding of what Water and Light does for them.
Better public understanding of
Yeah.
the Water and Light.
I'd hope to hear about the construction and progress being made on the redundant treatment plant.
It's probably an infrastructure and resources issue, but progress on the treatment plant.
And then an update on what's going on with staff training and who's up and who's retiring and things like that.
I'd like to see a formal structure for recruitment and retention. And that it's active and engaged and vibrant, that it's not just a position open, position filled, that there's a built-in workforce strategy, both externally and internally.
Deliberate workforce strategy.
And a result that we are drawing employees from people who didn't think about having careers here before.
So a broadening of the workforce too.
Yeah.
That we're
Great.
an employer of choice.
What about stakeholder relationships? We spent a lot of time on that today, or internal, external stakeholder relationships. What do you hope to hear back from the?
Continue to be an active member, promoting confirmation and much of the same things we do today, being there for community events like runs and that, providing the drinking water, and much the same we're doing today, this great customer outreach that we
Just a real visible role.
continue to maintain that visibility.
and maintain visibility.
And I would like a member of the commission in 5 years to be sitting here saying, remember, we had that rocky time with the city about 5 years ago?
Yeah,
Yes,
so better
yeah.
active relationship with the
Well,
city.
let's hope, Remy, that's you saying that.
Unless you're,
Thank you,
unless
sir.
you're governor by then.
Got my hands full right here. Thank you.
He's got a business to run too.
Okay, Secretary.
If the goal is that we're regionally connected in economic development, that we're sought out as a partner from regional entities,
An attractive partner or
a valued partner.
a valued
That
partner.
we
Better
bring,
word,
that we
that-
bring value
Water and
to
Light's a
the
valued
region
partner.
beyond the community in which we serve.
Yeah, that's a complicated,
Very complicated.
that's very complicated because the region is so, how do you, what does that mean, being a valued partner in the region, to whom?
That, I mean, that is something that you have to sort of unpack, but I think the low hanging fruit is the innovation campus. So that will become a regional hub, if not a destination for the state of Oregon, because it is one of the single largest industrial sites in the state. And it will absolutely be a partnership between Water and Light, the city, and private development. To be successful, we have to be on the same page.
Active partner on what would you call it? The
Right now it's the innovation campus.
innovation
It will
campus.
have a
Okay.
name someday.
All right.
And back a little bit to both of those responses, I think one of the things that we may be a regional valued partner would be in the regional water system. And it has to be in a way that it's a win-win for everybody. Our ratepayers have to be better off and our neighbors have to be better off. And I think hopefully, and we probably aren't, in 5 years, we're going to be moving in that direction, but it can't happen then. But that we are seen as trying to make this work for everybody in a way that helps our ratepayers as well.
So also a valued partner in the regional water
Yeah.
system.
And I think that needs to have an exclamation point on it, because we know the water systems that are serving the cities of Yamhill County are not going to be functioning at the level they need to, and Water and Light should be seen as a partner. And I agree, it's got to make sense on both sides.
Yeah.
But I don't think we lead with that. Right? So we need to lead with, when you're having a conversation about a water system, bring Water and Light. We want to learn about what you're thinking. We want to learn about the future of your city. And as you start to explore that, we can become a partner for you. We don't lead with, and we're going to charge you, right? So, but I think in that we can also be a connector. We might not be the solution, but we can be a connector.
Jody, I've always thought that the part about it's beneficial to both sides.
Yes.
Is important because the other model in Oregon is Portland and the Bull Run water and the way that the people they were selling Bull Run water to were so unhappy with them.
Yeah.
Because it was just that it appeared, from what I read, and I don't know anybody involved, but from what I read, it appeared that the cities who have left the system and done something else saw it as Portland just it's all about Portland. So I think it's important that because they know that we're going to take care of our ratepayers. So I think it's important that we say, this has to work for you too. Everybody has to be better off. That's why I say it that way. And I don't care how you lead with it.
Yeah.
Just that.
But I think from a regional perspective, Water and Light can be the expert in the room. So having worked with small cities and they have big problems, they're seeking out advice and counsel. And I think there could be a role for Water and Light in that. And if it gets down to a business relationship, yes, it's good for both. But I do think there's an opportunity there.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I agree.
What about resources and infrastructure? What do you hope to hear 5 years from now about?
That the supply chain is problems have resolved. And that the cost of pipe has gone way down, back to where it used to be. If you can do that for us, I think that would be wonderful.
And maybe this is where we see some expanded opportunity in a legislative approach. So are there ways that Water and Light can position its projects to be receptive to federal and state funds?
Yeah.
So that we're good with our money, right? But can we use other people's money to get some stuff done?
Better advocacy and legislative.
Yeah.
I think that'll help the regional, will help that, I think.
Because
Another thing to add is that maybe 5 years from now, the design and engineering related with high-head hydro would be more feasible for us to be able to generate power at Haskins or at McGuire.
Improve feasibility of hydro power.
Exactly. A new widget somewhere.
That'd be great.
That would be great.
it looks like a lot for 5 years.
Yeah, and one more. What about emergency preparedness? What do you hope? What outcomes you looking for there?
Cascadia hasn't taken place.
Yeah, all academics, yeah.
I think that there's clarity of Water and Light's role and responsibility in the manual, whatever that manual is.
Clarity
And
of
then
Water and Light's role.
we know who the partners are, and it's not a cold call, that we've warmed up those relationships. So when the time comes, we know who to call, and that we have engaged with the county because they're going to be the emergency management facilitator between the state and our city, that we understand where the capacity is there.
And that our staff is part of the manual thing. Our staff understands how they can best participate.
Yes.
I would add that it should be clear where our shared strengths or shared resources are. We should answer that question of the fuel dock, right? We should answer those questions and be in the process of jointly planning for the next one, so that not the next earthquake, but the next improvement like that, so that there's a large enough tank to be filling.
Right.
Yeah, because it'll help us define investments.
Yeah.
If we're.
One other thing that
Is the North Star.
I'm looking forward to the general manager announcing that the city's all-purpose rec and city hall facility sitting right next to us has just been a wonderful addition to Marsh Lane.
Are you saying that if MacPac starts up again, that you want to throw your name in the hat to serve on that advisory committee?
No, ma'am, I'm not. I'm telling you. I got a hell of a deal for you on a piece of property next door with underground parking, etc. Trading stock, as Tom and Jody will know, I dug in on. We got a deal for you, Remy.
Okay, so 5 years from now, you come to a commission meeting, it's time to think about doing another strategic plan. The first thing you get is a report from the general manager about how you're doing on the last plan. And Jacqueline, what do they hear?
Sure. So within the strategic priority of organizational focus, you'll look forward to hearing that the community has a clear understanding of the utility and its role. There's a clear structure for recruitment, retention, and workforce development within the utility. And that McMinnville Water and Light is an employer of choice for a diverse workforce. Regarding stakeholder relationships, the utility maintains its visible role within the community, has an improved active relationship with the city. That as a utility, that you're a desired, valued partner and connector, as well as a trusted expert within the region. And that there is a strong partnership regionally with many organizations, including but not limited to this innovation campus. And also partnering as we move into infrastructural success with the strong partner of the regional water system. Moving into the category of infrastructure and resources, that the treatment plant is well on its way or completed based on the timeline.
It's not gonna be-
Um,
Wait, excuse me, I can't imagine we'd have the Willamette Source treatment plant completed by then.
It won't be.
this
So
was
it's more like solid progress.
progress.
Solid progress.
Maybe we'll have the piece of ground finally decided on.
Yeah, so then hopefully that'll be less than 5 years then.
So
Yeah,
you're,
progress.
you're making satisfactory progress
Yes,
within that plan.
Yes,
Similarly, progress within the regional water system with the
Mhm.
requested exclamation point. You're addressing supply chain issues and improving your responsiveness to other unforeseen things with including building in those redundancies to address who knows what inflation and other challenges may come your way in the next 5 years. Working on an associated legislative agenda and advocacy agenda within the idea of resources and infrastructure. And that McMinnville Water and Light is putting thought and energy into the improved feasibility of hydropower. And finally, in the category of emergency preparedness, the utility has a clarity of its roles internally and as a partner that includes staff understanding of their roles, that there are strong partner relationships looking to the county as the leader of convening the utility, the city, and the state and other partners. And finally, an understanding of the utilities and broader regions' strengths and weaknesses to continue improving planning for emergency preparedness.
And if that's the report you get, you're gonna feel like we did the right plan today.
yeah, except for things will have changed, of course.
Of course.
As I probably should.
I had just a thought about the infrastructure or a question. I think I'm have some lack of clarity around the growth plan for McMinnville and the city and water and lights system. And I don't feel like we've talked about over the next 5 years, like what growth and expansion look like or what the plans are for that. When we've talked about zone 2 and we've talked about development and development fees and how does all that get paid for, how those systems grow. Like, I think that's something that's going to impact us in the next 5 years, but I don't have clarity about the larger discussions amongst the city and the systems about how we're gonna walk into those things. I
And
don't know
you're
how they're gonna
talking
happen.
about not just the infrastructure that this organization is responsible for, but for the broader growth of the community.
No, I think specifically for this plan, I'm thinking about the water and light infrastructure, because I mean, it's just something that keeps coming to meetings, right? We have new developments, we have new growth. I don't know what the city's 5-year plan is. I'm sorry that I'm not more connected into, some of the planning and the urban growth boundary and all those things that I should be more educated about. But I think those are in the next 5 years, those are going to have some impacts on the
They have
council.
a big impact on this.
And so I don't feel like we've addressed that in this 5-year
More
plan.
clarity and sort of synchronization with growth plans for the
And
community.
not just growth plans for the community, but then the extension of that would be how changes at the state are affecting the intention and then how that affects infrastructure. I'm thinking of House Bill 2001 right now that basically eliminated the possibility of single family residential. You have basically everything is multifamily.
Yeah.
So as we're annexing in these properties over the next years that were just added in our successful UGB expansion, what do those pipes look like?
And to build on what Remy said, it's not just the new areas, it's the changes to existing areas like electrification. If everybody suddenly were given a Tesla in McMinnville, we'd melt all our transformers, as I understand it, because we couldn't charge them. So dealing with the electrification and also dealing with, as Remy said, the infill, like a house burns down or somebody buys a couple of houses and then instead of 2 homes being served by this water pipe and this transformer, you've now got a 10-unit apartment building or townhouse or whatever they call it. So
To me, it sounds like it would be good for us to engage with city on sort of the built environment visioning of what's happening what's happening on the planning community development side and how we as a utility engage in that. Because those are really separate activities now.
And I think traditionally what's happened, and Ed can help me here if I'm wrong, and staff can certainly correct me, but I think what's happened is the city has said, we're gonna grow in this direction or that direction, and then Water and Light's figure out a way to put in a new substation or to put the pipes in, and sort of our staff has sort of talked to city staff at a, at a lower level, not commissioner and council level, not even general manager or city manager level, but at engineering level as to what's going on, and then sort of did it. And I think you both have seen that with the zone 2 stuff where city grew that way, and now we're trying to figure out how to make that work. You've seen it in the innovation center idea. When that suddenly started developing, we started scrambling to find another substation site out there. But on the other hand, we put a substation in on the north end of town out there in the Grand Haven area because we knew it was going to grow that way. And so
I could add, if I could add, two things. One is that this report would also show that we've had some progress with our undergrounding program. That's, getting power lines into the ground.
yeah,
And the second one, everybody should know that the Water and Light Engineering Department is on the ground floor with the building department on everything that comes about. Anybody that brings some feasibility concept in to Heather and her staff, they often got to start at Water and Light to make sure that there's ample resources available. And that every project that goes through for a building permit also has come across our engineer's desk and that. So if you want to talk about two great departments working well together, engineering and building, and our engineering staff, they've been great resources. And I can tell you as one that works with them all the time, we couldn't ask for better stuff.
Great. And I'm hearing, I think if I tried to digest the last 5 minutes of discussion, it would be better synchronization, clarity, planning, understanding for long-term changes in the built environment. And there's, you've given quite a lot of very interesting examples of it, but it's more just having a better clarity on how that means.
Mhm.
So this feels like we're in pretty good shape in terms of the next phases of the plan will be building out some of the detail under all of this and that'll be a lot of staff work to come back to you at the next phase. But Andres, we're going to walk you through what's coming next.
Trina, can you go to the next slide? No, the next one. No, the next one. All right, here we go. So what's going to happen next? Thank you for this great conversation. Is the strategic priorities are going to make up we're going to form different work groups, staff work groups around those strategic priorities. And as part of that, staff is going to be able to look at these measures of success that you put up here and some of the strategic direction that you've given on that and some of the key issues you've identified and start to really come together around, okay, what is the goal that we're hoping to achieve here over the next 5 years? And what are the objectives that we're going to list to achieve that goal? And so we'll have 4 working groups of staff, and those results will filter back up in the next meeting that we have in January to this group. And you'll be able to see kind of the staff progress, react to it, ask questions, and be able to give some additional feedback and strategic direction. Then we will have a conversation with staff again, assuming that the objectives and goals are affirmed, to really get down to the even more granular actions and measures. The work groups will meet again, discuss kind of what are the actions that we are going to take to achieve those objectives that are going to get us closer to that goal. And then once that comes back, we'll come back again to this group and say, okay, here's what the staff is thinking about. What are the actions and success? What does actually measures of success look like within those individual actions? And that will take us through the remaining part of this plan.
Plus, whatever it is we all figure out we're going to do with the city relationship.
Yeah, and so, correct. Thank you.
So we'll engage in this process before we see the final draft.
We're gonna,
Two more
the
times.
plan is we'll be back here twice.
Okay.
Once at the goals and
work
objectives
group
level, and
sections.
then
got it.
another time at the actions and measures level. That'll be the full plan, and then there'd be a final document, which might be when you actually adopt it.
So there's 2 more times that we're going to be having kind of similar types of conversations with you all. Once in January, once in February.
I want to make sure that we're not creating a one-way direction with the city. I want it to be dynamic, and I don't want it to be, we shall do this. I'm hoping that it's much more a dialogue, that it's framed as a dialogue, that we're not directing the city or city leadership or the council to do this thing because we think it's the right thing to do. I think it needs to be much more two-way.
And that's what I was trying to say about making sure they have the time and the bandwidth to have.
But that's
meetings with us.
assuming that it's a meeting. That's assuming it's right. So I don't think we can assume it's that.
Okay.
It may be determined that it's a project, and it may be one we've identified. There are different ways to build relationships and understanding, and so I think we can't assume what the outcome is, but I don't want it to be we're going to do 1, 2, 3. I don't think that's the way.
Oh, come on, we're gonna take you out to play miniature golf.
Yeah,
Please, Phil.
I think
How is that team building?
Go Sam.
I think there's a lot of interest. Obviously, we heard about today. I think there's an interest in both parties around kind of getting to some sort of joint framework or agreement. There's obviously a lot of key issues that we've discussed today that we still need to resolve. There's an element of there's a little bit of parallel element here, but there's also, is this organization on the same page as what it needs to be to what do you want your role to be within these different categories as it relates to the city? So before you go and say, hey, we think that this is the role that would be helpful, city, for you to play, there's a clear kind of organization that needs to happen at this level, right?
Yeah.
So that's going to happen at the same time that, we're having these other external partnerships, and it will need to be a series of kind of interactions and engagements, not just one meeting where we're going to try to solve everything.
Right.
So,
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
So hopefully you see how these things are building on to each other. We're meant to be done with this part of the process at the end of February, where you'll have a final plan for approval. And that's what our current schedule is. So hopefully you found this session to be informative
Yes, thank you.
and we'll stick around here for a few minutes if you have any questions, but otherwise, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right, any questions or comments before we close? No?
Appreciate the conversation.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you all so much. Meeting adjourned.
Thank you.
Trina, thanks for sending over the link. Appreciate it. Happy holidays, everybody.
Thank you. You
Happy
too.
holidays, Ed.
Thanks, Ed. Bye-bye.